The issue of benefit fraud is something which I suppose is important. It's a perennial concern trotted out by governments to assure taxpayers that they are safeguarding public funds. The Public Authorities Fraud, Error and Recovery Bill, heralded as the most significant fraud crackdown in a generation, promises an arsenal of new tools: direct recovery of funds from bank accounts, suspension of driving licenses, the expansion of oversight mechanisms, and the government estimates savings of 1.5 billion over 5 years, though against the 8.6 billion in annual fraud and error over payments, it's worth questioning if this is merely a drop in the proverbial bucket. Behind the bluster lies a critical question: is this legislation tackling the problem or distracting us from the failings of the system within the ministries responsible for welfare administration? The image of a benefit cheat is an easy target, a social bogeyman exploiting a system meant for the vulnerable. While such cases are real and often egregious, they represent a fraction of overall fraud. The DWP's own figures reveal that nearly half of the 8.6 billion lost stems from errors made by them rather than deliberate deception, often due to the labyrinthine complexity of the benefit system itself and the failure of real help. Instead of simplifying the system or addressing administrative failings, the DWP shifts blame downward. Benefit claimants, often navigating opaque eligibility criteria and poor communication, are left to fend for themselves. Anybody who's tried to fill out a PIP form will know exactly what I'm talking about. The pandemic exposed these cracks further, with overpayments soaring because of rushed measures and insufficient oversight, not exactly the fault of ordinary people. The crackdown provides a convenient deflection from failures in government accountability, and while the DWP amplifies its pursuit of fraudsters, it remains silent on the mishandling of universal credit rollouts, delays in personal independent payment, PIP, those assessments, and the chronic underfunding of local job centres. These failures exacerbate financial hardship, pushing people into precarious situations where mistakes or desperation are inevitable. And as for the punitive measures, revoking driving licences for unpaid debts may feel satisfying to policymakers, but it disproportionately affects low-income individuals, often reliant on transport to secure work or attend essential appointments. Bank account monitoring, albeit subject to safeguards, risks becoming another layer of invasive bureaucracy. And meanwhile, larger-scale fraud, like the recent £50 million industrial-scale scam, raises questions about whether the government is equally fervent in tackling fraud higher up the food chain. The true issue here is not fraud alone, but the inefficiency and the opacity of the welfare system. Instead of investing in robust digital systems, better trained staff, clearer communication, the government opts for headline-grabbing punitive measures, and this approach does little to rebuild public trust or provide a safety net worthy of a 21st century democracy. To start with, the government needs to ensure that the directions to the public are clear and concise and accurate, rather than the mumbo-jumbo of jargon and acronyms which are routinely churned out, and the warnings about behaviour continually churned out. Most of the time when you have to deal with government institutions, they are talking a language that ordinary people do not understand, and they are talking a language that is wrong, grammatically erroneous, and completely perverse. It is a language which is peculiar to themselves. The policies at play, casting a spotlight on fraudsters, deflects attention from the larger structural issues: the NHS in crisis, the schools underfunded, the economy struggling under mounting debt, and so much run by twits. The £1.5 billion saved here pales in comparison to the billions squandered in the COVID-era procurement scandals or dubious contracts, areas that remain far less scrutinised, that still haven't been examined. While tackling benefit fraud is a valid objective, it should not become a tool to scapegoat the vulnerable and to deflect from ministerial and procedural error. A government's responsibility is to foster access, fairness and accountability. If ministers truly seek to turn off the tap, they might begin by repairing the leaks in their own system.